Okay, good afternoon. My name's Steve Newby. I'm one of the tech leads in Europe for Microsoft, specializing in our security solutions. So in particular, all around the breach detection solutions that we have with Windows 10, but coming with other things. So I'm going to talk to you today around what we've got for Defender Advanced Threat Protection, but also how the other products that exist within Windows support what we're doing with Defender ATP. So these are turbulent times. You'll all seen the press. We've had number of breaches this year. So we've had WannaCry, we've had Petya or not Petya. You saw the recent announcement about Yahoo, where they've expanded their estimate from 1 billion to 3 billion records. It's all about preventing that from happening. But what happens when it does happen? What happens when someone gets into the network? So, and I accept you may not want to answer this question, but can I just see a show of hands? Who has had some sort of breach within their environment? So there's quite a few hands went up. The hands that didn't go up, I suspect you probably didn't want to either answer the question or you simply don't know. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of attacks that take place that just sit under the radar. And this is what we refer to as an advanced persistent threat. So Microsoft's been doing a lot of work in security. We actually spend over $1 billion on security R&D every year. Now, 10 years ago, when you talked about Microsoft's security company, people would just laugh at us, which is understandable. Even 5 years ago. But today, we're actually, we're recognized as a major player in the security market. We do a lot of research, we provide information to other vendors. We work in partnership with other vendors to generate this information. This all feeds into something called the Intelligent Security Graph. And the Intelligent Security Graph is what feeds all of this. So take notes, I'm going to be asking questions on this slide. It's an eye chart, I know, but it's all the technology that we have within Microsoft around security. This is where our $1 billion goes. Developing this, providing integration into Azure, into Windows, into the server platforms, and also into third parties. You know, we're a lot more open about working with Android, with Apple today, and all of this is about securing whatever platform a user uses and make sure they're fit for accessing the network. And when they do access a network, what is there on that device that could potentially cause a threat? So we look at this in 4 different ways. Identity. Identity is the new security boundary. Rather than people going for devices directly, people are going for identity. So all of the threats that occur, it's really important that identity is protected on the devices, but also in the cloud. I suspect most people in this room are using some sort of cloud service. Whether that's stuff from Microsoft, whether it's from Google, from Amazon, you're using some sort of cloud service and you've got identity that sits within that cloud. You've also got your own personal identities. So you might be accessing websites that are maybe banking websites, they might be media websites. Who uses the same password for more than one website? I certainly do. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but I use the same password for more than one website. That in itself is an insecure element. So typically what you may find is an attacker may go for a website that's maybe less security on it. So they'll compromise a lower security website, and then they'll use the password credentials from that to then attack the more important websites, things like banking. Apps and data, what we call shadow IT, people using cloud services and actually things like Dropbox, things like social media, and actually providing details onto those which can potentially compromise an environment. Securing your infrastructure is obviously really important, and using the intelligence within the cloud to detect what's happening within infrastructure, not just on-premise, but in the cloud. And then finally, your devices. Whether you're using Apple, whether you're using Linux, whether you're using Windows, those devices need to be secure and aware of what's going on. So the way we do this is by something called the Intelligent Security Graph. So this is something from Microsoft that we've built up over a number of years, and we have feeds into it from all our different products. So all of the Azure products will feed into the Intelligent Security Graph. We also take feeds from partners. We've got what's called Microsoft Threat Hunters who go out and look for malware, they look for threats. We process around 450 billion authentications in Azure every month. There's 400 billion emails being analyzed. We're not reading people's emails, but we are checking them for malware, we're checking them for junk, etc. We also do some quite interesting things around networks like Tor. Tor is probably aware it's an anonymous browsing network. We seed the Tor network. By seeding the Tor network, we can understand where people are going to when they're hopping between servers to anonymize. Not to track down the people, but because those servers are also the same sort of servers that attackers will use to compromise systems. So those servers, the IP addresses, the URLs, will all feed into this intelligent security graph. So all of this data is supplemented from our products, but then it feeds back into the products as well. And this is where we come to the Windows 10 layers, if you like. So how do we protect what people have on a device? I'm sure you've all heard of Windows Defender. Most likely when you hear the term Windows Defender, you're thinking about antivirus. Antivirus is certainly part of it, but antivirus is not the end of it. All the other products that relate to security on a Windows device are now getting a Defender name. So Defender, rather than being a product name, is becoming a brand name. So you'll have Windows Defender Smart Screen, Windows Defender Firewall, Windows Defender Application Guard. All of these products will feed up into the Windows Defender Security Center. And I'm going to show you some of that as we go on. We've also got something called Security Analytics, which is part of the Defender Security Center to allow you to score the security level of your devices. So you might have a few thousand devices, and the idea is to score 100 on each element that we monitor. So things like security updates, things like whether encryption's turned on, whether you're using device guard, whether antivirus is up to date. All of those factors that contribute towards a score. So within the security analytics dashboard, you will be able to see a straight view of your environment and where you are from a security perspective. So when you look at these elements, what we do is we break them down into the concept of pre and post breach. So pre-breach is all the factors that are there to prevent an attack from occurring. So how do you stop an attack getting onto network, onto your environment? What processes have you got in place to protect things like Office documents, to protect macros running on the device, to protect malware getting onto that device? That's all what we refer to as pre-breach. But once someone gets past all of those elements, how do you then deal with that? And that's where we come to the concept of post-breach. So post-breach is our advanced threat protection, identifying an attack that's taken place on the network or on your environment that you've not been able to protect against. And the management of all this, finally, is around SCCM and Intune. So you use SCCM or Intune to manage the policy going onto those devices. But I'll explain a bit more about what's needed from an infrastructure point of view. So I'm going to cover some of the Defender elements, and this is important because it feeds up into the advanced threat protection, into the Windows Security Center, Defender Security Center. So Smart Screen. Smart Screen is a technology that we've had in place for a long while. And it works on the basis of intelligence that we pull down from the cloud to validate the safe level of a website. So what I was talking about earlier around feeding all that data into the intelligent security graph, that feeds into Smart Screen. So we're able to understand where websites are suspicious or where they may be trying to do something malicious on your device. And we'll do our best to stop the attack at that point. Stop what we call drive-by attacks. And Smart Screen will flag up an issue and try and prevent the user from going to that. And obviously, the user can still go past that, but we're trying to give the user some warning. One interesting element about Smart Screen is traditionally it's been associated with Internet Explorer and Edge. We are going to be extending Smart Screen so you'll be able to use Smart Screen with Chrome. So the same level of intelligence and technology you're getting from us on an Internet Explorer and Edge platform will also apply if you're using Chrome as your browser. On the concept of browsers, Windows Defender Application Guard is a new feature that's coming with Redstone 3. Redstone 3 will be released in a week or two, so it's the next build of Windows. And the idea of Application Guard is it isolates a browser session. So we're using virtualization-based security. The same level of technology that we're using for some of the other components like Credential Guard, Device Guard. And what we're doing is we're isolating the browser session in essentially a virtual machine. So when a user starts up an Application Guard session, a VM initiates. Everything they do within that browser can only stay within that virtual machine. So any malware that runs, it will run within that virtual machine, but it doesn't get access to the operating system. Any exploits can only see a virtualized file system within that virtual machine. There is no possibility for it to go outside of that virtual machine. As soon as you close that browser, it wipes everything. So no trace is left of anything that took place in that session. Speaking to one of our customers, what they're going to do is they're going to have all of their corporate-facing websites and all the websites they have with partners are just going to run within Edge. Anything else, they'll put through Application Guard. So anything like accessing social media, accessing buying websites, etc., that will all go through an Application Guard session, so it's contained. And anything that's detected in this Application Guard session will get reported up to the Windows Defender Security Center. So you'll see visibility of any exploits that try to take place within that session. Windows Defender Device Guard. We've had this since build 15.11 of Windows 10. It is about securing your operating system by locking down which apps can run on it. So you create a whitelist of applications, and you can control what applications run based upon the signed certificate. All commercial apps, or the majority of commercial apps, are signed. When you're doing internal development, most software developers will also sign their apps as a best practice. So the way you control this is you say, I trust all applications from a certain certificate. So you might say, I trust all applications from Microsoft. I might trust all applications from Adobe. Now, where you've got thousands of apps, you're thinking, okay, this is going to be quite an admin overhead for me to do all this, to find all these certificates and place them. What you can do, and what we've enabled with the latest builds of SCCM, is you can simply trust SCCM. So when SCCM deploys an application, it's wrapping a certificate around it. And you choose to trust that certificate, which means your device guard policy is simply saying, I trust everything that's deployed from SCCM. Anything else a user tries to download from the internet or run from a USB key will simply not run on that device. And again, anything that goes against this policy will get reported up to Security Center. You also have the ability from the Security Center to push a policy down to a client to actually control a specific application and allow that. So, Windows Defender antivirus. Who uses Windows Defender antivirus? Okay, so there's a few hands. Even 2 years ago, we had a really bad problem with Windows Defender antivirus. It wasn't a good solution. We were getting knocked out of the park by other vendors. We were not competitive at all. We have made a huge inroads into Defender AV. So much so that in tests from comparison websites like AV Comparisons, AV Tests, we're seeing 100% on scores for zero-day attacks. We also, in a recent test, we beat Kaspersky for the first time. We're now regarded as one of the top 5 vendors for AV solutions from an enterprise level. We're seeing a lot of customers who are starting to swap out their AV and replace it with Defender AV. One of the reasons for that is because it's built directly into Windows. So from a management point of view and a deployment point of view, when you roll out a new Windows client, you're not having to worry about an AV agent. The updates for that AV element are coming through your standard update channels. And you don't need any infrastructure and over and above what you have with SCCM, Intune, WSUS, all of that will then just manage AV. Because it's built into Windows, it's also tamper resistant. So it runs as a protected process and there's less opportunity for an attacker to disable that. The reason we got the 100% around zero-day attacks is by something called cloud protection. So this concept of block at first sight. So what cloud protection does is it allows us to control and validate whether a file is malicious. So in this scenario, you have an attacker. They create an email and that will have some links in it. So it might be phishing, links to an exploit site. The attacker puts some malware on the command and control center. The first user to click on the link, downloads that malware. At that point, the AV element on their Windows 10 client says, I've not seen this file before. It's come from an external source. I've not seen this file before. I'm going to check with the Cloud Protection Service. Checks with the Cloud Protection Service, sends the metadata up. Cloud Protection Service says, I've not seen this file either. At which point, that file gets requested up there, and then it gets detonated in a sandbox. So within that sandbox, we then check what that file's trying to do. If we determine it's malware, that then blocks it on that user. So you have the first user here, what we determine is patient 0, will have their file blocked, so they cannot run that malware. The way it works is you've got your IT admin that sets a policy, so to inspect all unknown apps through SCCM. Then you've got your cloud solution, so whether it comes through email, whether it comes from someone clicking on a link on a website, the same processes will apply. I don't know if you can see this bit at the bottom here. It says this could take up to 20 seconds for a scan. Obviously, that's due to the having to pull the file up and detonate it within the cloud. That only occurs for the first user. So if you've got 5 users who get the same email or click on the same link, the first user, it will take 20 seconds. The other 4, as soon as they validated the metadata with the cloud service, they will run it. So there'll be no noticeable delay for those other 4 users. The final point before we move on to the ATP side of things is this thing called Exploit Guard. Exploit Guard is around, is replacing what we had in terms of EMET. So the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit, which we had for a while with Windows 7 and above, and that's about reducing the vulnerability of applications running in your environment. So what we can do with this is actually provide exploit guard policies that stop exploitations, make things less vulnerable. We've got the ability to lock down the attack surface area. We've got the ability to protect sensitive folders. So where you've got a ransomware type attack, one of the things that ransomware will do is it will try and encrypt a file within a folder. You can simply lock down the folders and say any non-user processes cannot access these folders. The other thing that we're doing in conjunction with Defender Antivirus and OneDrive, so OneDrive for Business, what it will do, if Defender AV detects that a ransomware attack has taken place on the device and there's some files have been encrypted, it will block OneDrive from syncing that file. So yes, you'll have an encrypted file on your local cache, but the cloud version of that file will not be encrypted because AV communicates with OneDrive and blocks that from happening. So that's functionality that we've got coming in the next build. So Exploit Guard gives us a lot of control over the typical type of exploits that we see. In particular, Office. So the best way to stop an attack occurring through an Office file is to stop people using Office files. So we just stop any PowerPoints, we stop all the documents, and we say to people, there you go, you can't use any documents. It's not the most practical of solutions. So, okay, I'll step back from that and I'll say, right, I'm just gonna block all Office files and macros. Again, it's not really going to be too effective because especially, where you've got finance departments literally rely on macros in Excel. They can't do their job without them. Okay, so these two elements, and what you see here with the red element here, the red indicates where the percentage of malicious files you get in that scenario. So no macros, you're not really getting much in the way of malicious files. With macros, you get some malicious files. When you've got macros that are executing content, that becomes a different matter. Because that content could be executing PowerShell scripts, it could be downloading code from a website, and these are where you see a lot more attack vectors. And finally, macros that download and execute content. Pulling stuff down from an exploit site and executing it. That could be malware, it could be script code, whatever the case. These two elements are where you need to start looking. And this is where you can use controls from Exploit Guard. So that will lock down those files and provide not only the ability to block that from occurring, but also reporting on when exploits are occurring within those files. So let's look at how the attacks start. Now, how they got in, pretty common. So spear phishing, watering holes, direct hacking. Social media is literally a gold mine for attackers. Going to LinkedIn, going to Facebook, finding information on people within those services is really easy. And then you can do things like craft emails to appear as if you're from a person that another person knows. And this is a really common playbook for attackers. One of the things we've seen here is almost half the systems that have been compromised had no malware on them. Antivirus solutions are only good at preventing malware. But where you've got exploits that occur in there, they're exploiting vulnerabilities within the operating system or code that's running on there. So they'll be using tools like PowerShell to exploit a machine. So there's no malware involved in that. 23% of recipients opened phishing messages and 11% clicked on attachments. I spoke to a customer a while back, and he was telling me that all his users will blindly open every email that comes into their inbox. Because as far as they're concerned, any email in their inbox has been checked by IT, so it must be safe. That causes him an issue. So technology is important in this respect, but so is education. Make sure your users are aware of what the scenario is for an attacker breaching their systems. Try running running your own little scenarios internally and see how many people get duped by that, how many people end up sort of falling into that trap. We even do it at Microsoft. So we will run campaigns internally at Microsoft to see if there's anyone that's going to start clicking on random links, etc. And then this final figure, 200 days. 200 days of an attacker being in a network. This is pretty much an average figure. If you think back to the Sony attack that happened a few years ago, the attackers were in the network for over 300 days. And that was obviously a big issue because they were stealing data, media, embarrassing emails from CXOs started appearing on the internet. So once the attack started, what do you do about it? And that's where Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection comes in. So with Defender ATP, we have two forms of detection. So we've got indicators of compromise and indicators of attack. Indicators of compromise are known threats. So known URLs, known IP addresses, known malware. And that's a database that we have that feeds into the intelligent security graph that provides all of this information for us. We also take a feed from FireEye. So FireEye, they have their eyesight threat intelligence database. We take that and we supplement what we've got with that database. So that gives us our indicators of compromise. But the real power of ATP is the indicators of attack. This is behavioral-based analytics. So we use machine learning, and we use all of that information we got from the intelligent security graph to feed into that machine learning. Other threats that are detected in other ATP tenants will all feed into that as well. So PowerShell running on a Windows device is not necessarily a suspicious activity. PowerShell running on a Windows device where it's setting a file to auto start or it's tweaking the registry, those are things that start to flag alerts. Those are indicators of attack that we'll pick up. By a single pane of glass, what we mean is all of the Defender components that I've talked about will all report up into that Defender Security Center and provide information back into Security Graph, but also give me visibility of where threats have been prevented as well as where they're occurring at the time. It's built into Windows 10. So all current versions of Windows 10 have Defender ATP built into it. What this means is, in order to deploy Defender ATP, you do not need to deploy any infrastructure. It's simply a case of subscribing to the cloud service and then having the Defender ATP endpoint, you just onboard that. And you onboard that with a config manager policy or group policy or even with the script. And that simply sends a certificate down to that device that then onboards that into the service, and that service then reports in. Because it's built into Windows 10, it is tamper-proof, but also we are doing a level of detection that we feel is unrivaled, because we can start doing kernel and memory level detection at a level that other vendors who use agents can't. If you imagine you've got an agent sitting on Windows and it's starting to poke around in the kernel, that's when you'll start to see things like blue screens occurring. So these are issues that we wouldn't see within our environment because it's just part of the OS. And it's amplified by Microsoft Secure. So all of those elements that we get from Intelligent Security Graph feed into that component. It's not antivirus. Just to be clear, you still need antivirus. So it's not there to replace it, it's there to add to it. Antivirus is your pre-breach, ATP is your post-breach. And this is where we sort of fall into it. And you can see some of our competitors here. We've got the Symantec, Trend, McAfee, and then down here. So the one I come across most is CrowdStrike. So CrowdStrike are a very successful EDR vendor. They've got a good solution. But we feel that we are very competitive in that, especially since we acquired this company, Hexadite. Hexadite was an acquisition we did 4 months ago now, and it allows a level of automation into our EDR tool, into ATP, that we didn't have before. And I'm going to cover some of the Hexadite stuff as well. So the architecture of this all is this. We've got your endpoint. So all of the behavioral sensors, they're collecting huge amounts of data on the endpoint. That goes into the ATP tenant, and we can store that data for up to 6 months. So there's no additional cost for storing the data. You can choose 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. It doesn't matter to us, whatever you want to do. And in fact, I would say there's no reason why you would choose less than 6 months. The only customer or company I know that's doing less than 6 months data is Microsoft. Because we've got 750,000 machines reporting into our tenant. So they took a decision to reduce the amount of data that we stored purely to save us a bit of money. But that's the only reason we did it. There's no implications for you as a customer. So all of that data we supplement and we feed into our cybersecurity division. We got our threat intelligence and partners and Microsoft hunters. We can also feed all this data into a SIEM tool. So we currently have connectors for Splunk and ArcSight, and we've also got a connector for QRadar, which is going to be released within 2 weeks. So if you've got a SIEM tool that isn't one of those three, we support the REST API as well. So the REST API means that any SIEM tool that supports that, we can provide feeds into that. That API also means you can take your own threat intelligence data and feed it up into the tenant. So if you've got specific things you want to look for as well, that can all feed up into the tenant and alert on it for you. So this is what we collect. The Sense agent. Incidentally, the Sense agent is the same component of Windows 10 that does telemetry. If for some reason you've got telemetry turned off, and these days I'm not sure why you would, because that's providing a lot of information around upgrade readiness and compliance that you can leverage. But if you've got telemetry turned off, so long as you haven't got the Sense component disabled, it will still feed into Defender ATP. You do not need to have telemetry enabled for Defender ATP to work. So all of this data we collect, we generate alerts, provide insights into machines, and this process data is really sort of comprehensive about everything we collect. We do not data mine it, and we do not, any data that leaves the tenant, and data does leave the tenant from a view of sharing that threat data, any data that does leave the tenant is stripped of all personal information. So everything's anonymized, nothing that associates your organization will ever leave that tenant. So I'm going to go into a demo, but the first thing I want to show you is the attacker's view of this. So what I can show is this video shows a typical attack. Let me just... So what we see here is on the left-hand side, you've got the attacker. On the right-hand side, you've got the victim. Now, this was based on a real attack. There was a company put out an RFP, and the attackers got wind of this, so they emailed procurement within this company, and they attached a document into that email to say, response to your RFP request, and that document had malicious code enabled as part of the macro. So what you'll see here is the attacker. So they open this document, wants to enable editing, and they're going to enable the content. As soon as they enable the content, that can then execute code. So what it's doing is it's elevating Word to a system level. It's stealing a system token from a vulnerable driver that exists on the device. Word's now running a system. And the next part that the attacker's going to do is they're going to try and hide. So they'll inject the Word process into SVC host. SVC host is a really common process on Windows. And we're also going to steal the credentials of the user. So those user credentials enable us to then look around the network and target other machines. So we're going to use PowerShell to target another machine and make the same attack on that other machine. So the important points to take away from this are the attack arrived by email, compromised 2 devices and the user's identity. Remember I talked about identity is the new boundary for attackers. That's what they're highlighting. They lived off the land and used vulnerable drivers and system tools. Took place in memory. It didn't touch disk. All of this attack would just go straight past any AV solution that you've got in place. And then we move laterally. So this is a process where we're using that identity and jumping between devices. I was speaking to one customer and they were hit really hard by NotPetya. They were in a state of, I think, about 10,000 machines. They had an 80 to 90% infection rate within 47 minutes. From the first machine being hit to 80 to 90% infection, 47 minutes. And that's across continents as well. It's not just all in one country, it's across continents. NotPetya was really vicious. So we're seeing these attacks getting very clever in the way they start to move across networks. So let me just show you what it looks like from a console point of view. So this is the Defender Security Center. So you've got your machines reporting in, you've got your active alerts that we see, we've got the high, medium, low alerts. We got our machines at risk. So, and it was Jonathan. Jonathan was the machine that was attacked. So if I click on Jonathan's machine, the first thing I might want to do is isolate the machine. So I can isolate that machine and stop it from talking to anything else on the network, except the ATP service. So I can still communicate with it, but it can't communicate with anything else. And then we look at the alerts that are occurring. And you see we've got our timeline here, we've got our 6 months timeline. If I click on an alert here, the timeline jumps straight to that point in time where the alert occurred. So known vulnerable driver. I can see this file here. I can see Defender AV flagged this as an issue for us. We've also got a link into VirusTotal. VirusTotal gives us information around other vendors that are flagging this file. The amount we've seen worldwide. If I go back to the user here, we see abnormal code execution. So clicking on this is where it's starting to get a foothold in Word. So it's elevating Word by try that again. So it's writing over an area of memory in Word that it shouldn't be accessing. So you've got memory allocation, which is taking place here. The next part is the process escalation. So at this point, now it's written over some areas of Word, it can now, with a system level token, it can now elevate Word to be a system level. So you see here, we've got Word access token was modified. If I click on this, I can see the process here. So Word, if I click on Word there, we see access privileges restricted, integrity level medium. That's what we'd expect Word to be running at. That's normal. Clicking further down, once the access token is modified, new token system, and all of these privileges that have been added to Word. So now Word has suddenly become dangerous. It's now in a state where it can cause serious harm in the environment. But the interesting part here is I've I've got it, I can see it come from Outlook. So one of the things I can do, I'll just close this. One of the things I can do is if I just look back a bit, I can see here, Outlook created this file. So this is the file where the attack came from. If I click on that, I can see what machines I've seen it on, but also what inboxes it's been on. And this is where it's linking into to Office 365. So it enables me to see what other inboxes in Office 365 or Exchange that this exists in. And I click on this, and now this opens my Office Security and Compliance Center, and I can see I've got Jonathan, who received that email, but a few minutes after that, we've got Eva and Jay. They both received the email, but because at that point we'd already flagged it as a serious alert, we communicate with ATP, and we then block that file in their inbox. So they'll still get an email, but within that email, they'll say the attachment was removed to prevent any further exploit. So going back to Jonathan. And here we go. We've now got a process was injected malicious code. This is where we're hiding. So Word's injecting into SVC host. It's cloaking itself. And then we've got remote shell. So remote shell is where we're starting to access external points and access command and control centers, but also start to make lateral movement across the network. So if I click on this, I see I've got my alert process tree. And under that, I can see that the command and control center it tried to connect to. I can also see other machines that it's tried to connect to. And if I click on Jay Hardy's machine, I've got a bunch of alerts that related to Jay Hardy's machine, but the interesting part here is it's Jonathan's account that's been used. So Jonathan's account has been compromised. I click on Jonathan's account. I've got the ability to Skype him directly, so it integrates into Skype, but I've also got the ability to look at ATA, or what is now being called Azure ATP. So Azure ATP is cloud enablement of advanced threat analytics. So if I click on that, I can see where we've had suspicious behaviors associated with this account. So what's he done recently that we've not seen in the last month? He's accessing abnormal machines. He's accessing abnormal resources. So resources he's accessing. In here again, I can see Jay Hardy, and if I click back on that, oops, so excuse me, on Eva actually. Let's click on Eva. If I click back on Eva, that then takes me back into Defender ATP, and I can see alerts related to Eva's machine. I've also got the ability to download an investigation package. That will pull down a load of information around that device. It will pull down security event log, information around installed apps, processes that are occurring on that device. Right, let's jump back to the deck. So this is what we've just seen. You've got Office 365 that can do attachment detonation. It can do URL detonation, whether that's in an email itself or in an attached document. You've got Defender ATP, which is about your endpoint protection. And then ATA, or like say Azure ATP, which provides details around lateral movement of a threat across your network. You can by tying these three things together, you can pick up an attack at any point along this kill chain, and you go left to see where it came from, and you go right to see where it's trying to get to. Incidentally, Defender ATP is part of what we determine as a Windows E5 license. Office ATP is part of a Office E5 license. Azure ATP will be part of an EMS E5 license, which is all bundled up into the Microsoft 365 suite, again as an E5 license. Obviously, for all of the all of the data that you've got coming in from all these different solutions, that's huge amounts of information that needs to be processed. So how do you deal with this? I presented this to an internal Microsoft person, and they were saying to me, is this a real job advert? I was like, no, it's not a real job advert. What we're trying to highlight here is the fact that it's very repetitive. Cybersecurity is a repetitive business as an analyst. You're looking at alerts, you're going through the motions, but part of the problem with this, in particular around security automation, ideal steps a human would take to investigate a cyber threat. Which human is that? Different humans do things differently. So in terms of standardization across cybersecurity, that becomes an issue, unless you can put a level of automation in. What threat requires actions? What remediation needs to take place? So the idea of automation is you're taking out the first tier of support for security analysts, those analysts who are doing the mind-crushing repetitive work. And if you look at this sort of dashboard here, you look at the number of high alerts you've got, 18. 18 is a manageable number for security analysts. Medium, 1.7 thousand, 1,700 alerts. Not all of those alerts are going to get processed or looked at. So then you have this concept of prioritization. What are you starting to ignore? And you might assign an arbitrary value to it. You might say, well, this alert's got a 79, this alert's got an 80. I'm going to ignore the 79 because that's not important, but the 80, oh, well, I'll need to do something about that. That is an issue because different people look at it different ways and you will miss things. This is where Hexadite comes in. Hexadite is an acquisition and it's around automating things. So you look at that, 3,500 hours automated. 3,500 is where someone hasn't had to stare at a screen and manually process that alert. Remediation that can take place. Remediation might be isolating a machine, it might be killing a process, it might be quarantining a file, or even blocking a file. Defender ATP have the ability to dynamically block a file across every machine in the organization. And this is what it looks like. We see the alerts, we see the data sources that we're getting information from, what's been analyzed, what type of threats have occurred, endpoints that we're seeing this threat on, where the alert came from. All of this is just going to be wrapped into ATP. It's not going to be an additional cost, it'll just be part of the ATP service. So just to wrap up, I just wanted to cover a couple of points around what's coming in Redstone 3. So Redstone 3, which is coming in next week or two, enhanced sensors support. We're going to be supporting Mac, we're going to be supporting Linux, we're going to be supporting Server 2012 R2 and above from an ATP perspective. We've got all our integration for Exploit Guard, for Application Guard, for the other Defender components. We've got the cross-integration of signals into Azure ATP, but also Office ATP. The QRadar interface I talked about. Opening up the Graph API so other vendors can integrate in. Things like ticketing systems. You can actually automatically raise a ticket on the basis of an alert taking place. Enhanced VDI support. Having the ability to recognize when a machine's in VDI. For a non-persistent VDI, each time that spins up, that's going to create an entity within Defender ATP. And suddenly you find yourselves with hundreds, maybe even thousands of machines that simply don't exist anymore. So that's what that will do. It will recognize when that's happening and filter on that basis. We can do high value and location tagging for assets. That allows us to create Power BI reports. Something I didn't mention, we can have Power BI dashboards that come off Defender ATP, and those tags can be referenced within that Power BI. Okay. Thank you very much. You have a question?
You have option to isolate one
Yeah.
It's manually done now.
Yeah.
There will be some automatic
That.
automatically isolate the client.
Yeah. So we. The question was, isolating a client is done manually at the moment. Will we have the option to automate it? The reason we've always said it's manual is because we're doing things like indicators of attack, it's behavioral based. We didn't want to be in a situation where we would isolate a machine. You imagine you've got your CEO and there's a suspect threat on his machine on a Friday afternoon. So you isolate it from the network, and he can't do anything on the network for the whole weekend. He was not going to be happy on Monday morning. So what we did is we made the decision it was a manual process because we didn't have the necessary information to allow us to make a properly informed decision. With Hexadite integration, that then feeds in and can make informed decisions and can be make decisions based upon the tags, based upon a number of other factors, and Hexadite can automate the isolation of the machine. Any other questions? Okay, I'll be around for 5 minutes if anyone wants to come and ask me anything, but thank you very much for your time.